Today, we are going to look at contracts or building contracts. You all know that after the tendering process is over, the building has to be constructed. The tendering process is used to select a contractor. And the next stage is to enter into a contract with the contractor for the construction of your project. Now let's try and understand what is a contract. As per the Indian Contract Act, Section 2H, a contract happens when a person makes an offer to get some work done against a consideration or against a payment, and when another person accepts that offer, that is the stage where a contract can happen. Essentially, a contract is an agreement. It's an agreement between two parties. And it is important to understand that each of this party is expected to do some performance. Now, in case of a building contract, the performance expected from the contractor is to construct the building. And the performance expected from the owner is to make payment to the contractor against the construction of the building. So these are the two parties to the contract, and each one of them have to perform a role, perform some kind of an action. And again, for a contract to be valid, the performance expected from each of the parties has to be equitable. Okay, equitable is another variation of the word equal. Of course, there's a difference between equitable and equal. So here, if we say that the contractor is building something and the owner is paying him, these two things that they do have to balance each other. Okay, that is the meaning of the word equitable. So a contract to be valid has to be equitable. The performances that are done by the two parties, they have to balance each other. Okay, so typically in a building contract, the preamble or the first part of the contract mentions that there is a owner giving its details of his address, etc., who is the first part, and the contractor, who is the second part. Again, all details are given. And then it says that the owner is desirous of construction of a building. The details are given. And for that purpose, he has appointed an architect. So the architect is introduced in the contract. Okay. The role of the architect is to make drawings, working drawings, and specifications. So we say that the owner has appointed XYZ as an architect and caused drawings, working drawings, and specifications to be made. And the contractor, who is the second part, he is supposed to construct the building as per these drawings and specifications under the instructions of the architect against a payment of the contract sum. And the total cost of the building is mentioned here. Okay. And then it goes on to say that this is to be done subject to the following conditions. Okay. And then there are the conditions or articles of agreement, as they are called, which detail out how this contract is to be executed. So this is generally the form in which the contract is made. Now here there is a very important point to be noted. The contract is between the owner and the contractor. The architect's name is mentioned because the performance of the contract is based on the drawings and specifications and instructions of the architect, right? But the architect is not a party to the contract. He is neither expected to construct or get things constructed, nor is he expected to make payment or take payment against the construction made. Obviously, the architect will be paid his fees, but that is a separate appointment or a separate arrangement with the owner. As far as the building contract is concerned, architect is not a party to the contractor, to the contract, though he is mentioned in the contract. This is a very important thing to remember. Now let's look at what are the contract documents. What are things are included in the contract? So first of all, there is this agreement. The agreement has to be done on the requisite stamp paper. Of course, even an oral contract is binding, but usually it cannot be enforced in the court of law very easily. Every contract must have the legal force behind it, and for that purpose, it is better to make a written contract and register it. And it is the architect's duty to ensure that the contractor and the owner are educated. They are told to execute the contract in the proper format. Now, it will also include, the contract documents will include, first of all, complete set of working drawings and complete set of specifications, because they are the basis on which the construction is going to happen. Then the contract will also have the conditions of contract or the articles of agreement. In addition to this, it will also contain the schedule of the rates and quantities, like the abstract that we attach to our estimate, or later on in the tender, the contractor must have filled his rates. So this abstract or schedule also becomes a part of the contract. Now here it is important to remember and understand that the schedule will have quantities of various items of construction, and it will also have rates for various items. Okay, but the rates only are binding on the contractor. The quantities are not, because quantities can change while construction is happening. Some quantities may go up, some quantities may go down. So they are not binding. Suppose in the schedule, let's say that the brickwork is 100 cubic meters, and in actual practice, the brickwork that is constructed is only 80 cubic meters. Contractor cannot claim that because in the schedule there is 100 cubic meters of brickwork shown, you pay me for 100 cubic meters. No. So the actual quantities are what are valid. But as far as rates are concerned, they are binding on both. So whatever rate has been quoted by the contractor, accepted by the owner, that rate is binding on both parties. This is something that is important for us to remember. In addition to this, the articles of agreement also contain something called as the appendix. Now, this appendix has certain things given in it. What is given in the appendix is something that we will study in greater detail in the next session. But let me mention what it has. It has things like date of commencement, date of completion, period for construction, liquidated damages, period for honoring certificates, value of interim certificate, so on and so forth. Okay, so there are all these sorts of defects liability period, limit of retention fund. These are some of the aspects that are mentioned in the appendix, and these are also binding on both contractor as well as the owner. We will study all this in greater detail next time. So all this is, it forms the total contract document. Okay, now let's look at what are the various types of contracts. Broadly, there are three types of contracts. The first one, which is most commonly used, is the item rate contract. As the name suggests, it's a contract which is based on different building items, their quantities and their rates, which are given. Quantities are not binding, rates are binding, and the rest is already something that we have discussed. Now, when do we use item rate contracts? Most cases, these are preferred because it is easier for implementation. As I told you, that during constructions, the quantities can vary, and it helps if you have a item rate contract. Also, the owner knows what he's getting, because he can compare an item rate to item rate, apple to apple comparison. So you can see how much does brickwork cost in the market, and what has been quoted, what am I getting getting into, what am I entering into. So it's easier for owners also to understand the import of item rate contract. So it is one of the most widely used contract. Second kind is the lump sum contract. Now, in the lump sum contract, the total contract cost is fixed. Contract sum is fixed. And then there are no items, no rates. The complete description of the project, including quantities, rates, etc., what is expected, has to be understood by the contractor and the owner both, because then there is no change. There can be no change. Now, obviously you don't use it for large projects. We tend to use this kind of a contract for projects which have to be quickly executed. Time duration is very short, and the entire project is so designed that there is very little chance of changes happening in the project. Okay, so only in these sorts of projects we use the lump sum project. Lump sum contract is actually quite advantageous if the project is very well laid out, cut and dried, absolutely no ambiguity, and quick time. Suppose the project is to be executed in 10 days, like that. Then we tend to use the lump sum contract. And the third is a very interesting one. It is cost plus basis contract. Now, this is where the contractor is paid the actual cost of materials, labor, etc. And then on top of all that, he is paid a certain percentage of the cost of labor and cost of material. This is a predetermined percentage, and this includes his supervision charges and his overheads and his profit. Okay, so this is also done when you have a lot of faith in the contractor, and usually there is a little bit of saving in this kind of contract. Again, for very small jobs, this is a very useful method of executing a contract. But for larger projects, the item rate contract is the most preferred contract. Now let's come to the next thing, and that is form of the contract. There are standard forms of contracts which are used by many people. There are, of course, government or public bodies have their own contract forms. As far as private practice is concerned, most architects tend to use the standard contract form that is published by the Indian Institute of Architects. It's an exhaustive document, and it is better to use it, because then nothing is left to chance, because most of the eventualities are taken care of. It's a tried and tested contract form. It is available in the IIA office. I would suggest that you buy a copy and keep it with you for the rest of your life. So this is as far as the contract form is concerned. Now, there are about 100 articles in the articles of agreement, and it is obviously not possible for me to go through all of them. Most of them, if one reads in the standard format, one will be able to understand. So today I'm only going to deal with the three very important aspects, and we will deal with some more when we talk about management of contract. That is the next session that we have. So here, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is architect's instructions and clerk of works. Now, what are architect's instructions? It's obvious that even if the working drawings are made and specifications are written, the architect has to direct the construction on site. He has to keep tabs on what is happening. He has to give instructions from time to time to the contractor. Now, when he gives instructions, if they are written instructions, very good, no problem. If there are oral instructions, it is the contractor's responsibility to reduce it in writing, send it to the architect, and get the instructions confirmed so that there is no misunderstanding. All right. It is also binding on the architect to uh, get back to the contractor as quickly as possible. If he has given oral instructions, then the contractor, when he writes to the architect and says that in a meeting we had on the site, these are the instructions that you gave, kindly confirm. Architect must not waste any time. He must immediately confirm or correct the instructions which are given him in the reduced in the return contractor. Okay. It is actually a good practice to maintain a book on the site, instruction book. And it is better that the architect writes his instructions in this little book which is maintained on the site itself, so that no ambiguity and there are no further problems. Now, important thing to understand is that the architect's instruction legally have the same force of law behind it as the specifications and the working drawings. That is the importance of architect's instructions. Having said this, let us also understand that the architects are not supposed to take care of day-to-day supervision. He's not supposed to be on the sites all the time. But he needs to continuously know what is happening. For this purpose, there is a provision of appointment of a clerk of works or a clerk of works. Okay. Now, what is a clerk of works? He is a person appointed under the guidance of the architect by the owner. He is paid by the owner. But his job is to report to the architect about the day-to-day activities that happen on site. Okay. He has to keep record of what construction was done, what material came to site, what was the kind of labor that was there, etc., etc. He has to also act as the eyes and ears of the architect, so that even if he's not present on site all the time, the clerk of work is his agent on site who gives him all the information. Okay, like you have read the Mahabharata, you have Sanjay who is telling Dhritarashtra how the war is being fought. Similarly, this fellow is your Sanjay if you are Dhritarashtra. He will give you all the information of anything and everything that is happening on site. Uh, Only one important thing, that even though he is your representative, he cannot take decisions on your behalf. He is not supposed to take decisions on behalf of architect. He can only convey the instructions of the architect or decisions of the architect to the contractor and ensure that they are being followed. So this is the first part about architect's instructions and the clerk of works. The second thing is about subcontractors or nominated subcontractors. Now, what are nominated subcontractors? It is obvious that the contractor will appoint subcontractors. He is not going to do all the work himself. He is going to appoint subcontractors to do part of the work for him. Now, the contract conditions must, or they do contain certain stipulations, like these subcontractors, the contractor has to make a list and submit this list to the architect for his approval. And when the architect approves a subcontractor, then he is called a nominated subcontractor. And every condition of the contract, which is binding on the contractor, is also applicable to the subcontractor. All right. Sometimes even nominated suppliers are appointed. So If a particular supplier is going to supply material, the contractor can get him nominated. Okay. Then subletting. Can the contractor sublet part of his work? See, subletting and appointing a subcontractor are two different things. Okay. For instance, there is somebody who comes as a labor contractor who has a labor force for doing concrete work. So he can come and work under the supervision of the main contractor. So that's one. Secondly, if there are three buildings, then the contractor will say, I will appoint another contractor to do another building for me. Is that allowed? Yes, it is allowed, provided it is agreed to by the owner and the architect. So without the permission of the owner and the architect, no part of the work can be sublet by the contractor to another contractor. All right. So this is as far as subletting and appointment of nominated contractors and subcontractors is concerned. Lastly, what we will tackle today is what happens if the contractor and the owner don't see eye to eye. What happens in case of a dispute to such a level that the contract has to be terminated, determination of the contract. Okay. So when we discuss determination of contract, it can be done in two ways. One, determination by the owner, and determination by the contractor. Now, in which situations can the owner determinate a contract? Number one, if the contractor is not following the time schedule, or if he is not removing defective work even after it is pointed out to him that this is defective, or if he is not listening to the architect's instructions, he is not following the architect's instructions, or if he has declared himself insolvent, which means he cannot do the work. So these are some of the situations where the contract can be terminated by the owner. Now, what is the process to be followed? You have to give a written notice. You have to then take possession of the site. You have to record the stage of work, how much work has been done. Then you have to appoint another contractor to get the remaining work completed. And while this is done, you have to maintain record, because this is at the cost of the old contractor. All right. So this is the process for determination by the owner. There is also determination of contract by the contractor. Now, in what situation that can happen? If owner is not making payments or honoring the interim certificates by the architect. The architect has certified that right now about 10 lakhs to be paid to the contractor, owner doesn't pay, or owner delays the payment, doesn't pay in the required number of days. So there the contractor can ask for termination, or due to force majeure, due to situations which are beyond anybody's control. Suppose there are floods, then suddenly the work stops. And if this stoppage is for a longer period, then obviously the contractor will not be able to complete the work in the either time limit or at the same rates. Because suppose the work was to be completed in 3 months and now it is going to take 1 year, rates will go up. So in such a situation, the contractor can ask for termination of the contract. Or sometimes what happens is there are delays due to not only force majeure, but due to reasons again which are based on the owner's desire. Suppose the owner doesn't want to complete the construction, he wants to stop. Say, paisa khatam ho gaya. That can also happen. Okay, suddenly banks refuse to pay or something like this. Even in such cases, the contractor can ask for determination. And what is the process to be followed? Once again, the contractor will have, first of all, the stage of construction will have to be recorded. Contractor will have to be compensated or paid for all the work that he has already completed, all the work that is partially completed, all the material that is on site, unused material, unfixed material on site, that also the contractor will have to be paid for. All the temporary structures that he may have built, tools, tackles that he may have left on the site, all these will have to be paid for, and a reasonable compensation also will have to be paid to the contractor for doing all this. So these are the several situations where a contract may have to be determined.